Brandon Sanderson Cosmere is a sprawling, ongoing series of interconnected books spanning different cultures, magics, and even planets. And although the end is not in sight yet, with the release of Wind and Truth earlier this month, we have arrived at an ending. For the first time in forever, every single major story arc has been concluded. And the question remains, which of the works is actually worth your time? Hi, my name is Vera, and I have read every single canon published work in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. And today, using the trusty tier ranker, I'm going to let you know which of them are actually worth the hype. I'll try to go planetary system by planetary system, and we're going to start off on Sel, the land of Elantris. Elantris is actually the first book that I read because I followed this really random reading order that I found online, not even from a video, but from a blog post, and I thought it was brilliant. I was warned that this is his first published work, and so the quality of writing might not be as good. I kind of disagree because I was honestly gagged at the character work, the world building, and how unique it felt with, you know, the magic system being these symbols called aeons, and then you have these like magical floating balls that act kind of like FaceTime called Seons. And I really liked the aspect of it, of us following our main character Raoden as he's figuring out what happened to cause the cataclysm known as the Riod. In this world, select individuals would undergo this transformation at night, turning them into a silver-skinned, white-haired, godlike being that could perform magic. Unfortunately, something happened in the past that now when this transformation occurs, you're turned into pretty much a zombie and you're sent away to the city of Elantris, which used to be heaven pretty much, but now it's just this walled-in prison for all the victims of this transformation. I also thought that our female lead, Serene, was amazing, but the person who stole my heart was Wraithen, who is this priest that is coming into Aerilon, the main city that this book takes place in, and he is basically just trying to convert them. And man, I love Wraithen. I feel like if I say anything about him, it's going to be a spoiler, so I'm going to refrain from doing so. But I was really amazed by Sanderson's ability to tie all those things in, to play around with the mystery aspect and have that penetrate every single aspect of the story. And yeah, I really liked this book, so I don't know why people complain. In fact, I liked it so much that I'm putting it into A tier. There is a short story that ties into Elantris, and it's called The Hope of Elantris, and it takes place during the climax of the novel. It just kind of gives a different perspective on the events, and I thought it's fine. I don't think it adds too much, but if you want to read it as kind of like a postlude to the book right after you're done, I'd say go for it. But it's also really short, so I can't really give it anything more than C tier. The other major work that takes place on Sel is called The Emperor's Soul, and it doesn't happen in the same region of the map as Elantris. It happens in the Rose Empire, and I absolutely love this. I think it is the most beautiful novella, and it is definitely Sanderson's strongest writing still. It is the story of a thief who is caught, and now she is tasked with creating a new soul for the Emperor using this magic called forgery. I think that if you're more so into literary fiction, this is a great starting spot for Sanderson, because even though it is so much shorter than like any of his other major works, it really manages to condense all the best parts of Sanderson's writing, from the characters, the magic system, and how the themes tie it all together with the plot. For this reason, I am putting The Emperor's Soul as my first S tier. With that said, those are all the works currently published on Sel. There are 2 more Elantris sequels coming in the near-ish future, I think. But for now, let's journey to the next planetary system, Scadrial, which is the home planet of the Mistborn series. The first book is Mistborn: The Final Empire, and I know I'm gonna get flamed in the comments because this is such a beloved book, and a lot of people actually attribute it to getting them into fantasy or getting them into more adult fantasy or even getting them back into reading. So I'm so sorry. I still think it's a good book. I just don't think that it matches a lot of other Sanderson's works, and I mainly had a problem with the writing style. It just really didn't click for me. But before we get into that, what is this actually about? We follow 2 perspectives. One is this thief called Vin, and she is recruited by this guy called Kelsier into joining his heist crew. What is this heist crew for? Well, there's this guy called the Lord Ruler, who is this godly tyrant controlling the entire planet. subjugating the Ska people, and only allowing the nobility to prosper. And because of some very traumatic events in his recent past, Kelsier has a very strong vendetta against the Lord Ruler, and has decided that it's time to kill a god. I think where this book shines is the atmosphere, the red sky, the ash falling from it, the mists that come in at night, which for some are the source of terror, but for others is a home of sorts. Not to mention the Steel Inquisitors, which are such a mainstay of the series, I think. Kelsier is also a fascinating character and one of the ones that I think about the most from the Cosmere as a whole, even. Vin, however, really annoys me. I really like the central idea at the center of her character that she struggles with throughout the trilogy of her having a more feminine side, with her loving to go to balls and stuff like that, but then the ruthless killer side that she eventually develops, stemming from also her thieving background. So even though I liked that central conflict, I found the character herself to be infuriating. And the writing style, as I kind of already mentioned, all through the first era of Mistborn, it feels very sluggish. And so it didn't really work for me. But all that being said, I'm going to put The Final Empire into B tier. This one was written to work as a standalone novel, so if you're looking for a taste of the Cosmere, this is a crowd pleaser. For me, each installment of Mistborn, at least the first era, gets better and better. And so The Well of Ascension is going to be an A tier. It's going to top of A. I think it is brilliant. I love the politicking. I love the more romantic aspects of it. I love the battles that are fought here. I love the world building that is done. I think it's amazing. Not to mention the bombastic ending. And when I finished this book, I was truly like, how can it get even better? And then it did, with The Hero of Ages, which is my second S tier. Although I found some aspects of the individual books lackluster, I maintain that I think that this first Mistborn trilogy is one of the best trilogies that I have ever read in my life, because every single part logically builds on the next. So much so that the last book's revelations are foreshadowed all the way from the beginning. It also has amazing character journeys that at times you don't realize are being developed right under your nose until they go to their amazing conclusions. The one that I can think of off the top of my head is for my favorite character. His name is Marsh, and I will not tolerate any Marsh slander. And so yeah, I think as a trilogy, this one's so good. And I highly, highly recommend. There is a tie-in short story that acts kind of like a prequel, and it's called The 11th Metal, but to be honest, it's gonna be my first D tier. I really don't think this is relevant reading. Again, it's really short, so if you wanna spend a couple of minutes just kind of looking through it, that's fine, I guess, but I really don't think it adds much, if anything, to your reading experience. Then we get to Mistborn Era 2. If you don't know, Mistborn was pitched as a trilogy of trilogies. Now this plan has expanded, I believe, and I think that Sanderson is planning for there to be 5 series, and these are called eras. First era is a medieval Renaissance Gothic setting. Era 2 is steampunk Western inspired. The third one is supposed to be modern age 80s sort of vibe. The fourth one, I believe he said, would be cyberpunk, and the fifth would be space age. But Era 2, the steampunk Western one, starts off with the Alloy of Law. And the one with this is that I don't know how much I can really judge it for, in my opinion, being of lesser quality than Era 1, because Sando just kind of wrote it on a whim when he was bored, which that kind of set a precedent, am I right? It wasn't really planned out strictly from the get-go like Era 1 was. And it makes me wonder what could have been if Sanderson had planned it a bit better, or even more actively. So with that being said, I'm going to put Alloy of Law top of C tier. Also, I have like this pet peeve with this book, and it's that the main villain's name is Miles 100 Lives, and I always thought that was the stupidest name ever. So just wanted to get that out there, because whenever I heard it, it really triggered me. Shadows of Self, in my opinion, was a huge improvement, and I liked it more than Mistborn: The Final Empire, especially in retrospect. It reads almost like this like noir mystery, and that really worked for me. And it's one that in retrospect I like more and more the more I think about it. Then we have The Bands of Mourning, which is going to be my third A tier. I think this book is brilliant. Am I heavily biased because one of my favorite female characters in the Cosmere plays a very substantial role here? Perhaps. And yes, the character that I'm talking about is Steris. I am a Steris defender for life. But I also think that between Shadows of Self and the Bands of Mourning is when Sanderson really committed to this being a full-fledged arc as an era where you can see the ties in from book to book much more. And it left me really anticipating the final book, which was The Lost Metal. The Lost Metal is a highly contentious one. I believe it was during the Lost Metal's marketing cycle or just before it that Sanderson said that the gloves for the Cosmere were off. And this is the first time that we really had a taste for that, because there were a lot of things that tied in from other series and characters that crossed over. And the entire time that I was reading it, I was really wondering how this would come across for someone who hasn't been interacting with the greater Cosmere. But even for me personally, because I didn't reread the books in preparation for The Lost Metal, there were a lot of things that I was missing. And there was one plotline specifically that was the big Cosmere mentions heavy one. Kind of felt a bit more hollow to me because it felt like this huge thing being shoehorned in for a plot that we don't care about as much because it's not directly relating to our main cast of characters. A fair critique that I think can be made of Era 2, as I already said, is that it feels like a lot of things were thrown on the wall, they weren't really planned, and then Sanderson had to figure out a way of connecting them. And you really do feel that in this last book, but given the situation in which Era 2 was born, I think that Sanderson did a good job of connecting all those things together. And I cried so hard at the end. I was devastated. I was not anticipating to have an emotional reaction to this book out of all of them, because up until this point, I did really like, for example, the Bands of Mourning, but as a whole, Era 2 just didn't have that big of an impression on me. And man, there were a couple of sequences near the end of The Lost Metal that just really, really hit hard. And so for those reasons, I'm going to put The Lost Metal middle of B tier. There is a timed short story to Era 2 called Allomancer Jack and the Pits of Eltania, and I actually kind of hate this, so I regret not making an F tier, to be honest. It stems from the in-world newspaper articles that we see throughout Era 2, where there are these little stories and fragments of stories of Allomancer Jack, and I just found them really annoying, and I didn't care, at all for them. But I am a completionist, so I did my duty and I read it and I hated reading it, but whatever, it's fine. It's over with, bottom of D. And the final work that we have that is strictly scadrial focused is Mistborn: The Secret History. I think that this novella for me is the case of I like the implications more than what we are presented with. So when I was reading it, every single page I was like, what the hell, what the hell, what the hell, ah. But it was more so for the implications and not the actual narrative itself, because the role of The Secret History is to connect Era 1 and Era 2. So to be honest, I don't really think that there is a central conflict to The Secret History, which kind of lowers my enjoyment of it, but I think that it is a Cosmere staple and that it is definitely mandatory reading at some point. And for those reasons, I'm going to put it top of C. During Secret History and in the Bands of Mourning, there is a character called Chris. And Chris comes from the White Sand graphic novels that take place on Taldain. Now, White Sand has been adapted into 3 graphic novels. I just combined them into one because, to be honest, in my head, they just kind of blend all together into one story. Sanderson has mentioned that he wants to make an actual prose version of White Sand because Chris is going to becoming a more and more relevant character, and so he thinks that she should have a proper introduction for the people not in the know yet. But what is White Sand about? Pretty much, think of it as Dune in the Cosmere. We follow Kenton, who is kind of like a failed Soundmaster. However, he was the only one that survives the attack on the Soundmasters at the start of the graphic novels. We follow him around as he's kind of trying to re-establish the Soundmasters. Yeah. And then he joins up with Chris, who is from the other side of the planet. Planet itself doesn't rotate, and so one side of the planet is constantly facing the sun, and the other side is shrouded in constant darkness. To be honest, I'm really intrigued by the setting, and I do hope that we go back there, especially since the end of the graphic novels foreshadows a sequel where the characters would hypothetically journey to Darkside, and I'm really intrigued in that setting, but a girl can only hope, right? As it stands and in the format in which they are, I'm going to put White Sand in C tier between Alloy of Law and The Hope of Elantris. I just really think that it needs some editing down, work on pacing issues, and on maintaining the tension. Next, let's journey to the threnodite system. One that for me is especially interesting because there's such a huge mystery surrounding what happened here and what the effects have been. Unfortunately, the tiny little sliver of answers that we get is mostly found in a short story called Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell, which, by the way, banger title, oh my god, love it. And it's gonna go to bottom of B. Again, it's just a little taste, but it does so much for me. There's like all this talk of the evil that haunts the ancestral homeland, if I remember correctly. And something that really excites me is that Sanderson said that he wants to write a Night Brigade novel in which he would dive into Lovecraftian horror and exploring that evil that lurks there. And to me, that sounds like such an amazing book. So Sanderson, if you're watching this, please, I'm waiting. But yeah, this short story has really piqued my interest so much that even though it's so short, I can't put it lower than B. The next planet that we journey to is Nalthis. And the only work that was published here so far is Warbreaker. And I think Warbreaker is really underrated. For me, it's going straight to top of B. Even though I do think that there are some pacing issues throughout the novel, except for the ending. I think the Sanderlanche in this goes so hard. The foreshadowing is top notch. The relationships are top notch. The characters, Vasher has my heart. Nightblood has my heart. Vivenna, Ciri. Did I mention Lightsong? I love them so much. And I find the magic system of breaths and that every single person is born with a capital B breath. And depending on how many breaths you accumulate, you reach different heightenings, which give you different powers. I think that's so cool. And it has so many inherent moral implications, like the fact that you're pretty much taking someone's soul if they give their breath to you. Like, that's wild. But at its core, we follow the story of two princesses, Ciri and Vivenna. Ciri is taken off to the neighboring kingdom to be married off to the God King. And her older sister, Vivenna, is like, not on my watch. And so she follows after on a rescue mission. I really think it's brilliant. Vasher is one of my favorite characters in the Cosmere, and so I really want more of him. And I find that the characters from Warbreaker, for me, and especially because the ones from this book tend to pop up in other series, they're like an emotional core for me. Yeah, I really just think this one is underrated. Next, we're not journeying to a planet per se, because these works are kind of lumped together in a quite unusual way. Essentially, Sanderson, a couple years back, sprung a surprise on us. He wrote 4 secret projects, 3 of which were related to the Cosmere. So because of that, for this segment, I'm going to be covering the 3 secret projects. The first published one was Tress of the Emerald Sea. Similarly to The Emperor's Soul, this is one where Sanderson really focused on writing and conveying atmosphere and personality through that, really separating this book and making it something unique. And I think it worked so much. I also loved learning about the ethers, because one of the first things that we learn about the setting is that it takes place on a rock on a sea, but the sea had no water. It was made out of these little grains of magic called spores, and that if they ever came into contact with moisture, bad things would happen depending on which type of spore or which color of spore you were interacting with. And Tress, our main character, lives on the verdant sea with the green spores. I love this setting. I love the setting. It is a loose retelling of The Princess Bride. I haven't read or watched The Princess Bride, but this book really makes me want to do just that. It is also told from the perspective of Hoyd, who is a character who appears in every single main series or standalone. He's a character shrouded in quite a lot of mystery, but I think he's also a fan favorite because he just keeps us guessing. I'm putting Tress just above the Bands of Mourning in A tier. The next secret project was Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, and I really liked Sanderson taking on a more cyberpunk type setting, and this was his attempt at writing a better romance, because a big critique of Sanderson's work often is that his romances don't quite land. I don't know, a lot of people say that they really love it. I think the artwork found within the pages of this book is beautiful. Unfortunately, I didn't really find the beauty of the relationship forged between our two main characters to really transfer to me. And I know I'm in the minority for this, so don't take my opinion. It also has subtle commentary on AI art, which I believe was inadvertent because he wrote this during the pandemic, before AI art was such a huge conversation, but by the time it was actually released, I remember it being really, really relevant. And so I was, really taken aback by the ending, and especially how that discusses the value of the human aspect in art. So even though my enjoyment of the book progressively got higher and higher and higher, I hate the ending. The ending is very controversial. I understand why he ended it that way, especially given the dedication and the context around which he was writing this book. I get it. Personally, I think it is disingenuous for the story, at least in my interpretation of it, which does knock it down quite substantially, but that's fine. That's just my opinion. And so for this reason, I'm going to put it just below Warbreaker. And then we get The Sunlit Man, which out of the secret projects, this is the one that you definitely need to have read at least some of the Stormlight Archive to read this book, arguably, or at least to get any sort of like emotional punches from it, because this book is very, 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 very high-paced. It doesn't leave you any space to breathe. And once again, I think that this is a book where, for some reason, I just felt like Sanderson's writing ability substantially drops. And the things that I wanted to hit didn't hit as much as I wanted them to. There are two scenes that in this book that did affect me, and a tear was shed. However, they didn't stem from anything inside the book itself, but more so for the implications that this could have for Stormlight. And I think that when I'm ranking a book, especially one that is supposed to act as a standalone, I can't really rank it based on the emotional aspects derived from its intertextuality, but rather on the value proposition that is found within the book itself. And unfortunately, I don't think that is very high. Again, I don't think it is bad. I think it is a solid book. I think that world building wise, it is something very original, and that's saying something, especially amongst the Cosmere. And for that reason, I'm going to put it, somewhere in C tier. I'm not sure if it's top of C, between Secret History and the Alloy of Law, but I really think that I like it just as much as Alloy of Law. Now you might be wondering, Vera, why is Sixth of the Dusk next? And my answer is that next year there will be another secret project coming called Isles of the Ember Dark, and Sanderson has said that this short story is going to be interspersed throughout as kind of like a flashback sequence, and so for that reason I'm including it within the secret project sequence of this video. I really, really like this one. It, or The Sunlit Man, one of the two anyway, is the furthest we have seen the Cosmere, and this was our first taste of the space age in the Cosmere. It takes place on this tropical island called Patji, but things aren't really as they appear. I don't want to say too much about this one just because the secret project is coming out next year, and I know some people want to hold off and not have any context for that, but all I'm going to say is this. In the state in which I read it, because I don't know if there will be any revisions to it done for the Secret Project 5, when it was in the state that I read it in, it was really good. And so for this reason, I'm going to put it to B. I'm really struggling with ranking the shorter works because the longer novels, they're just longer, we spend longer with the characters, with the world, with the magic, there's more plot stuff going on. But then again, Shadows for Silence and Six of the Dusk really captured my imagination in a way in which Era 2 never really did. And so I'm really struggling with ranking these books. But now, let's finally journey to Roshar, where Sanderson's behemoth of a series, the Stormlight Archive, takes place. We start off with the legendary Way of Kings. I love this book. Top of A. We follow Kaladin, who was trained to be a surgeon, but ultimately became a soldier and then was turned into a slave, and is now being sent to the Shattered Plains, where wars are being waged with the Parshendi, an invading force that killed the kingdom's king 9 years ago, I believe. At the same time, we have some perspectives from this girl called Shallan, who is traveling to study under Yasna Kholin, who is the sister of the king, but she's a heretic. She says that she doesn't believe in God, but Shallan, because she really, really wants to study, or perhaps she has some secret other motivations, is very determined to become Yasna's apprentice. And then the third perspective, that is our main perspective, is Dalinar. And Dalinar, my favorite character in the entire Cosmere. I love him. And not just in the Cosmere, but one of my favorite characters in literature as a whole. He is the brother of the king that died in the prologue. And he is having these visions of the past, visions where he's talking to God, to old kings. And most people kind of think he's crazy. But is he really? I think this book is plotted perfectly. I think the writing here is way better than a lot of the other works that Sanderson wrote up until that point. Yeah, I think it is such an achievement, especially since it had so much to do to lay the groundwork for the 10-book series. The second book is Words of Radiance. This is going to go top of S tier. But yeah, I'm trying to be very strict and to create kind of like a bell curve so that you can see the range. Yeah. Words of Radiance has the best duel that I have ever read. It has one of the craziest ending sequences that I have ever read. It's a wild book. It's a wild book. I think some of the most iconic scenes, not only in the Stormlight Archive, not only in the Cosmere, but also just in modern fantasy, are in this book. Unfortunately, the tie-in novella between books 2 and 3 of the Stormlight Archive is Edgedancer. And Edgedancer is gonna go all the way to bottom of D, not necessarily because it's worse than Allomancer Jack or the 11th Metal, but personally because I hate the main character called Lift. I don't want to listen to her. I don't want to listen to her thoughts. The only character that makes the Edgedancer bearable in my head is her spren Wendell, because Wendell is kind of like this grouchy old guy who is constantly like, Lift, what the frick are you doing? Stop. And yeah, to be honest, I really see myself in Wendell when reading a Lift chapter. I think Edgedancer is my least liked thing published in the Cosmere. But then we get the masterpiece of Oathbringer. Oathbringer is not only my favorite Stormlight book, it is one of my favorite books of all time. If you've been here around for a while, you might know that I am very stingy with which books I give 5 stars. Oathbringer is the only book in the Cosmere that I have given 5 stars to. Every single Stormlight book has a character for whom we get flashbacks to get a little bit more context about who they are, especially at this point in their journey. And the character that we follow is Dalinar. And even though I was a teenage girl reading this book, I saw myself more in a middle-aged man who is a war criminal than I did in many of the other characters in this book. I don't know what that says about me, but I think that a little bit of Dalinar Kholin is found in all of us. Not to mention the way this book is structured, with there being 2 huge battle climax sequences. And I think both of them were built up so well and paid off so well. I read the last 250 pages in bed, shaking, crying, hyperventilating, and it was the best time of my life. So what more can I say? This is not only a favorite Cosmere book for me, it is not only a favorite fantasy book for me, it is a favorite book of mine. Then the tie-in book between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War is Dawnshard. And much like the case of The Secret History, I kind of think Dawnshard is mandatory reading. And it's fine. It's like this side little adventure which suddenly turns into one of the most important events in the entire Cosmere, arguably. And so for that reason, I'm going to once again put it in B tier, but Rhythm of War is a good book. Let me just start off there. However, there is a certain character that takes the spotlight quite a lot, and I famously hate this character. And I know that my opinion is unpopular because a lot of other people love this character, but especially in this book, I hated her. And that character is Navani. Whenever I got to a Navani chapter, and there were so many of them, I wanted to claw my eyes out. I was like, oh my gosh, girl, skip. Also, there's a character that we come back to, and this character has a very huge spotlight, even though they had already a flashback book. And I was just so sick of this character moping around the place. And like, I get it because Sanderson wants to give like a realistic depiction of depression. Really did not enjoy reading it, especially since this book is so thick. It's a brick. Because of that, subjectively, I'm going to put this book in top of C. And then we get to Wind and Truth, a book which I have finished literally last night. The long-awaited finale to the first arc of the Stormlight Archive. I have a lot of thoughts on it. I'm absolutely shooketh by some of the things that have happened. But quite ironically, even though I love the destination, I think that the way it is written to get to said destination is inherently flawed. Basically, Sanderson decides to break away from his 5-part structure that he used in all the previous books for this final book, and I commend his bravery, and I can totally see what he was trying to do. And I'm not saying that he shouldn't have done that, because I think as a concept, that's an amazing way to structure this book. The way he executed it, I feel like some parts stretched when they didn't have to, and there were some storylines that were actively more interesting than others. There were big parts of this book that felt like a chore to get through to get to the actually interesting stuff for me. And now there's so many plots in this book. I'm sure everyone is going to find something to like. Personally, I found the way he managed the switching perspectives and the length of each segment to just be a bit too much, and that it actively dissolved the tension that was supposed to be building. So on paper, if I'd write out all the stuff that happened, I'm like, whoa, this is awesome. I love it. I love it where the characters end up. That's crazy that this happened. This was totally foreshadowed. Great. But when you're actually reading it, you're kind of like, can we get to the interesting stuff, please? So I wonder if it just needed a few more rounds with beta readers and a few more rounds with the editor. But at the end of the day, I'm very happy with where we ended up. And so for this reason, I'm going to put Wind and Truth just behind Warbreaker, though I feel like it's on the same level for me as Warbreaker, roughly. The other thing that kind of drags Wind and Truth a little bit lower for me is that I think some of it is just clunkily written, and I understand that there's a lot of mental health stuff there, but sometimes it feels very preachy, where it just didn't ever feel preachy within the first 3 books. So I don't know, I feel like the nuance just wasn't there, and the emotional hits didn't hit as much. That being said, I did cry 3 times. Anyways, this is my full ranking of the entire Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson. I'm pretty sure I haven't left anything out, but if I did, do let me know, and I'll write a correction in the pinned comment. But before I let you all go, please let me know what your ranking is of the Cosmere, or of the series that you read in the Cosmere. And for those of you who have read Wind and Truth, please discuss with me in the comments. But the thing that I would please ask of you is to write spoilers and then press enter a couple of times, just so that people can go into the comment section safely. Because I'd really hate for someone to be spoiled for the ending of Wind and Truth. Anyways, that's all from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!